Great. I'm seeing curious, strong readers, self-confidence. Oh, that's mine. Scholarships to university, or maybe challenged to reach his full potential. Excellent. Great answers. To be excited and empowered for learning. Beautiful. I'll just give us another minute to continue growing. Very good. Math skills improve and confidence improve. Nice. Self-motivation, all really important, right? Continue loving school and to process the learning. Very good. Lovely. Excellent. Thank you guys for sharing. Those are wonderful, beautiful things to keep in mind for our children's future. During this session today, we are going to share how Stokes is using PARCC data and other data. We're going to reflect on our PARCC data to identify strengths and growth areas. We're going to explore how to interpret individual student score reports, and we're going to provide resources for families for further practice. Before we jump into the meat of the conversation, I want to mention a couple of norms. Our presentation is being recorded, so you're welcome to turn off your video if you desire. If you don't turn off your video, you'll be in the recorded presentation, which is totally fine too. Throughout the presentation, we'll pause to answer questions from the chat. So please go ahead and put your questions in the chat. Ms. B is paying attention to the chat and recording questions, and we'll do the best we can to answer them in the moment. And if we can't, we have a section at the end for questions. And please also be considerate in using the chat so that attendees are able to focus on the presentation. So making sure that the things that you're putting in the chat are really relevant to this presentation. Thank you so much. And so I just wanted to start out by grounding us in how Stokes is using assessment data in general, including PARCC data. Stokes is continuing to support the whole child with social, emotional, and physical wellness. So we take into account our academic data, but we also make sure to understand how the whole child is doing. Teachers, learning specialists, and instructional coaches collaborate to analyze data from PARCC and other interim assessments and adjust instruction in the classroom. So we go through data cycles every time we give an interim assessment or get assessment results back. Our instructional coaches and our leadership looks at it, and then we share it with teams so that they can make sure to target the needs of your children in the classroom. Our student support teams support groups for students identified as in need of support. So we do that by, analyzing data and making sure that we're targeting the kids who need it most. And I'm sure that we'll have a presentation on that later in the year, or if you are part of the student support team process, you will, they'll reach out to you specifically. And also the instructional leadership is analyzing curriculum choices and adjusting both scope and sequence of curriculum and supplementing curriculums or changing curriculum as we need to. Today, we're going to focus most of our report, this presentation, on PARCC. And so PARCC is an assessment that's mandated for all DC third through eighth graders and some high schoolers, but for Stokes School, it's the third through fifth graders. Our third through fifth graders take reading and math. Fifth grade students also take science. And PARCC tests students' attainment of grade level standards. So some of our interim assessments are adaptive, meaning they adjust to the level of where a student is. PARCC is not adaptive. So students get all the same level of questions, which is questions on grade level standards. One big difference between PARCC and other assessments that we give is that the PARCC assessment is timed for most students. So if your students have accommodations like special education accommodations or English language learner accommodations, the test is timed. And so that's a really different kind of format than is typical. And when we send out this presentation, there's a link here to tutorials and practice tests if you are interested in finding out a little bit more what the actual assessment is like, but we're going to go through an experience. Ms. B, do we have anything in the chat that I need to address now?
Yes. So we have one question that says, how specifically will student support teams use the PARCC data to target support?
Yep. So our PARCC data, we don't ever take one assessment as the sole indicator of whether a student needs targeted interventions. We use multiple assessments here at Stokes as well as other data sources. So PARCC is taken as one piece of data to indicate whether a student needs additional support, along with NWA scores, iReady, DIBELS, teacher recommendations, like how they're doing in the classwork, things like that. So it's one piece of a puzzle about how students are targeted for support. Hope that answers your question.
And then the second question is, what does PARCC stand for?
Partnership for the Assessments of Readiness for College and Career. Great question. And so the PARCC assessment assesses our Common Core state standards, which are standards that DC public schools are required to use to drive instruction. Thank you.
And I think that was our last question.
Great. So what I would like us to do here is we're going to have a little interesting experience as parents. And so what I would like us to do, if we are able, and I know that many of us are at our desks or available to do this. Some of us may be on our phones just listening, so we may not be able to do all of this. But what I would like us to do is have a little experience with a 4th grade mathematics question on PARCC. So I'm going to make you guys do some math right now so we can experience what our students go through. I think it's a really important experience. So you can see in front of us on the screen, there's a question with a graph, and it says, Miss Sloan asked 117 4th grade students the question, how many pets do you have? And she displayed the data she collected in the bar graph shown. And so what I'm going to do is have us answer part A and part C. And so how many of the students responded that have 2 pets? Answer your question and enter your answer in the box. And so you don't have to enter it in the box because you can't, because you're not on PARCC. But if you could answer in the chat, how many of the students responded that have 2 pets? Good, I see some answers coming in the chat. Yep. So as you can see, that one is a pretty straightforward type of question, right? We look at the information we're given and we answer a math question based on our observations and our math skills of interpreting data. Very good. And then part C says, find the total number of pets the 4th grade students have. Explain how you use the bar graph to solve the problem and show your work using equations. Enter your explanation, your work, and the total number of pets in the space provided. Now, I'm not going to have you answer this question, do all of that math, but what I would like us to notice is I want us to pay attention to some of the things that PARCC is asking our students to do. And so if you can unmute yourself, whoever wants to hop out, and just kind of explain to me, what's something here that's different about the kinds of questions you may have experienced on a standardized test as a child? And what is PARCC asking us to do in Part C? You can just unmute yourself and call it an answer.
Hi, this is Crystal Galladay. I think for tests back in the day used to be more multiple choice, or you just answer it. You didn't have to show your work, and they want you to show your work and explain it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ms. Galladay. Anybody want to add on to her answer?
I would add on that the PARCC questions are making kids, part A, part B, part C, makes kids really build on, like there's always like a lower level question in part A, part B and part C are building on that. So it makes kids really have to show their deep level of understanding of the content and the application, not just the process to get the right answer.
Wonderful. Gosh, you guys are really on point here. Those are exactly the kind of answers that I was looking for. That's exactly right. So you can tell, right, that all of these things are kind of multi-step and complex. We have to use explanations. We have to show our work. We have to really interpret in real life situations what we're doing. And so you can kind of see the difference between what we may have experienced as children on a standardized test and what now we're expecting students to be able to do. Thank you so much. And then I'm not going to have you write an essay or anything like that, but I just wanted us to kind of read what the prompt here is. And so on every English language arts exam for PARCC, at the end of the exam, typically there is an essay question. And typically what it's asking you to do on the essay question is to write an essay that uses two of the pieces of literature to show some really deep level of comprehension. And so I'm going to go ahead and read the prompt out loud. Identify a theme in Just Like Home and a theme in Life Doesn't Frighten Me. Write an essay that explains how the theme of the story is shown through the characters and how the theme of the poem is shown through the speaker. Include specific details from the story and the poem to support your essay. Right. And one of the things about PARCC is that there's this little box for writing, but PARCC really does expect our 3rd through 5th graders to be typing an entire essay in here, and the box expands as they write more. So it's not just that they want like a few sentences about this, they really want an essay with an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. Great. I'm gonna pause here. Ms. B, do I have any questions I need to address?
We have, outside of taking tests and practicing on apps, is there any typing practice available for our scholars?
Great question. So we do use computers quite a bit at Stokes now in order to do our academic work, and they are typing with regularity. And that's the kind of typing practice that we usually encourage our teachers to be doing, is just integrating using a computer and typing into their typical work day, into their typical school day. There are some free apps. I don't remember them off the top of my head that'll help with the typing practice, but I can definitely follow up with that.
And then we have, as COVID had a huge impact on academic learning nationwide, we saw a huge gap in mathematics. Can you address what academic components will be reintroduced, as it could have been lost while in virtual 2nd grade?
Yep, absolutely. So we introduced a new interim assessment this year called iReady Math, and that gives us a lot more sort of granular information on how students are attaining grade level standards in different domains. And so what we're doing now is we're working with teachers and coaches to kind of address how they're using that data in the classroom to target kids' specific needs. And then there's a couple other things at the end that I'll mention. But really it's about integrating into their classroom some really targeted instruction based on what we know about kids and where their skill gaps might be because of the interrupted in-person instruction.
Nothing. Yep, that's it.
Great. And just I just wanted to share very briefly, these are the performance levels that PARCC scores us on in both ELA and math. There's 5 levels of attainment. Levels 1, 2, and 3 are not reaching readiness for college and career, and levels 4 and 5 are meeting expectations or exceeding expectations. A lot of schools and the state also look at level 3 as an important measure, because that is a level that means that they're really close to meeting those grade level standards, but haven't quite reached them. And so a lot of folks look at that at level 3 as well. I just wanted to give us a brief overview of our data. You may have seen this before in some of the communications that we sent home. The yellow or orange bar is math, and the purple bar is ELA. And you can see here, this is how Stokes is comparing to the charter sector in general. And so East End only had 3rd grade who tested PARCC last year, and so that's why they're only reflected in the 1 3rd grade bar graph.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? So East End is growing grade by grade every year, and last year East End didn't have 4th or 5th graders, so the only PARCC tested grade at East End was 3rd grade. So this year East End will test 3rd and 4th grade. Any big noticings you want to drop in the chat here about this data?
We have another question.
Sure.
Beyond the assessment tool you previously mentioned, what other specific targets will be implemented to bridge the gap for the huge decline in math PARCC scores?
Yep. So both campuses have additional online tools that families and teachers are both using as a supplement. Brookland is using Dreambox, and East End is using IXL to kind of give students additional supports. There are some very specific classroom targeted instructional strategies that teachers are using. But beyond that, this may be a better question for, like, if there's certain students who need additional support, the student support team is going to be putting in interventions for those students. But in general, we are using, targeted instructional strategies to address the gaps in math instruction. The assessment tool does come with supplemental skill building lessons that we're going to try and integrate in small groups during math classes. This is our longitudinal PARCC data compared with the DC charter sector. Just as a note, only Brookland's data is reflected here because, again, because East End is growing one grade level every year, they didn't have historical PARCC data. But you can see here this, the yellow bar is Stokes Brookland ELA scores. The purple bar is Stokes Brookland math scores. Dark blue band is charter's ELA scores, and the orange bar is charter math scores. And so you can see that there were significant score drops both across the sector and at Stokes specifically. But our score drops were slightly less bad than the score drops that the charter sector experienced. We are working diligently to address them. This is our subclaim data. So this is a place where we get to kind of analyze the specific parts of the assessment that how Stokes is doing relative to our charter sector. So you can see that our strengths for the subclaims relative to the charter sector are subclaim 2 and 3, additional and supporting content and expressing mathematical reasoning. And one of the big reasons for that is that we have a curriculum that really encourages students to be able to express mathematical reasoning and develop deep conceptual understanding of mathematics. And so our big, and that is, one of the things that we're working on is making sure that kids are also developing accuracy and computational fluency, which would be addressed in that subclaim 1.
Julia, we have a couple of the same question. How do we compare to DC charters versus DCPS? Do we know how DC charter compares to DCPS?
Yep. So the real reason that I didn't include DC charters or DCPS scores in here is because those sort of granular details were not released in terms of sector level scores to charter schools in general. We can now dig into sort of state level data, but when we first got our scores, we only had access to compare to the charter sector in general. And DCPS, some of the DCPS schools did slightly better. So I think that the state level data is slightly better than the charter sector in general. These are ELA subclaim data points relative to the charter sector. Charter sector is orange, Stokes School is purple. You can say that our ELA reading and vocabulary subclaims are stronger than our written expression and use of language subclaims. And so that's an area in which we're collecting more information and data on this year to really address some of those skills in writing. These are our math subgroup data points. So I'm just going to go through what these different bar graphs mean while you're processing this information. This first bar graph is our all students, and so again, this is math, how our students scored. All of our students scored. Level 5, which is exceeding expectations, is the turquoise color. Level 4, which is meeting expectations, is the green color. Level 3 is yellow. Level 2 is orange, and level 1 is red. And so if you look across the graph, you can kind of see where our green line ends is where our kids are meeting or exceeding expectations. And where our yellow line ends is where students are nearly meeting or exceeding expectations. So I'm just going to give us a moment to look at this, and I'll make sure we understand the bottom axis as well. So we have female, male, Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, 2 or more races, white or Caucasian, at risk. At-risk students are defined by a state government as students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, homeless students, or students who are more than 1 year over age in their grade level, English learners, or students with disabilities. So as you can see, there are definitely some areas for growth here and some areas of strength. One thing that I do want to note is, though, we are still seeing very significant achievement gaps between some of our subgroups. Our achievement gaps are smaller than our typical across the city. And this is that same graph, but for ELA data.
We have a question.
Sure.
Is Stokes working intentionally to address the racial disparities we see here?
Yes, absolutely. We work really hard to make sure that all of our students are having their needs met. Our teachers go through anti-bias training, and we also make sure that we're addressing, we're assessing and regularly addressing any disparities in achievement that we're seeing. We look at our assessment data, our interim assessment data, not just PARCC data, in subgroups as well as a leadership team. So we're making sure that we are actively working on trying to address the disparities between our subgroups.
And then you may have kind of touched this question already, but can you explain the subclaims individually or provide where I can look it up so we can understand where our kids' strengths and weaknesses are?
Sure, absolutely. There is a link and I will Miss B, in the instructional leadership team presentations, there's a link to the OSSI page of PARCC information where the subclaim, more detailed subclaim information is. If you have a minute, otherwise I can just grab it at the end. You could drop those links in the chat. But yes, so on your child's score report, you'll see a little bit more information about what those things mean, and we'll go through what that looks like in a few minutes in this presentation. Oh, right now, actually. Yesterday you should have received the 4th and 5th graders at Stokes last year should have received their score reports in their backpacks. This is a snapshot of student learning, of course. Like I mentioned in the beginning, we take this into consideration along with many other points of data to understand what a student is doing. As you can imagine, these are elementary school students. So taking any one test score as a final understanding of a child's performance should definitely not be done. So what you want to do is, if you received a test score and you're concerned about the test score, you want to make sure that you're taking that in the context of any other assessment results you've received, as well as feedback from your child's teachers in order to understand how they're doing relative to grade level standards. You should have also gotten a letter explaining the child's student score reports. In this presentation, which we'll send at the end, there are links to the English, Spanish, or French versions. And then I also have a sample student score report to bring up. So this is just a generic Scott test taker. This child is listed as being in grade 7. And you can see that just like the score reports you should have received, this is their general performance level relative to how children could have performed on the ELA exam. And then on the second page, they should give more information about the subclaims here. So there are 3 levels of performance on subclaims: meets or exceed expectation, nearly meets expectations, or below expectations. On each of these subclaims, you should see more specifically how your child performed on the subclaims on that report. And then there's also a section where the performance is compared to students at the same school, students in the District of Columbia on that same test. Oh, I'm sorry. So students in the District of Columbia, students in the district. So for us, that's just our 2 campuses, either Brookland, combined Brookland and East End for 3rd grade, and just Brookland for 4th and 5th grade. And this is how they scored relative to their school. So for Stokes, Brookland students who were in 4th or 5th grade last year, these 2 bars will be the same. So you should be able to see there how your child compared with all of the students in DC. And so I just want to emphasize this sentence here. Scott scored better than 57% of students in DC who took this grade 7 ELA test, meaning relative to all the students in DC who took that grade 7 test, Scott scored better than 57% of them. So he scored in the 57th percentile relative to all the DC students who took that same test. I'm going to pause here and ask if there are any questions on how to interpret these score reports. Seems like we are okay.
Sorry, Julia, can I
yeah.
ask a quick question? Sorry.
Absolutely.
Does the score report indicate if your child is a part of any subgroups that is not explicit to you? Like if your child is an at-risk student, will the score report tell you that?
No, ma'am. It would not. So an at-risk student would be any student who qualifies for government benefits such as SNAP, TANF, things like that, or is listed as homeless. So I think that if you are a part of that subgroup, you would probably know. It's their proxy for economically disadvantaged students, but it's not just based on salary. It's based on a few different aspects.
Thank you for
Does that answer your
clarifying.
question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Stephanie raised her hand.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm just a little concerned, and I've asked this question a couple of times in the chat. However, PARCC is a statewide, well, District of Columbia wide assessment tool, and as you know, it has a lot of indicators, as you indicated, especially with the racial disparity, and that when they look at young adults who are incarcerated or don't finish high school, they look back at this PARCC score, and those who perform below an average, below the expectations, tend to have a direct correlation. So I want to know, for parents who are concerned about like, what concrete things are you guys doing, and what can parents do to help bridge the gap? I just need something specific. The assessment tool, yeah, that's good, but what are you doing with that assessment tool? How are you specifically using the information that they did not learn effectively in 2nd grade because of the virtual environment, to help them, do better in 4th grade, because, all of that stuff kind of was lost.
Yeah. I totally understand. you know, this is a kind of unprecedented time for education, right? There's been a really big shift in what's been going on, and we haven't, you know, nationwide, we saw that with the NAEP data as well. Like there was a bigger drop than there has been in test scores for, you know, decades. And so I totally understand your concerns, and I think they're exactly right on. So the best thing, I mean, I think so there's two components here, right? Like how are we addressing students' general skills in the classrooms, and then also how are we giving extra support to students who are struggling? And so those are kind of two different questions. I think specifically in the classrooms, and I'm not sure that I'm, you know, the person to necessarily dive right into the instructional strategies that they're using. But there are some very specific things that coaches are working with teachers on in terms of how to address those skill gaps while still maintaining the trajectory of the standards for that grade level, because it's kind of a balance, right? Like you don't want to just, if students missed standards or learning that they should have had in second grade, you don't want to let go of third grade standards in order to address those skill gaps. You have to kind of fold them in and bring them up more quickly to grade level standards. And so there are some specific strategies instructionally that teachers are using with the support of their coaches and leaders in the classrooms to target those specific needs and build everybody up. And then additionally, we do have, you know, a student support team process that is a thing that's going on to address the needs of kids who are really in need of additional support specifically. And so if you want more information on that, maybe Marana and Ana Maria, we could have the SST coordinators do another presentation on how the student support team process works this year. Or you can also reach out to those coordinators at your campus. Ms. Richardson, are you at East End or Brookland?
I'm at East End.
East End, okay. So we can drop in Ms. Cottrell's email into the chat if you're concerned specifically about your own child's progress, but that is what we are doing. We're, you know, working actively to make sure that we're addressing any deficits or skill gaps in learning that occurred because of the pandemic. I'm just going to give you guys a few suggestions about how you might want to prepare your child for PARCC for the May of 2023. And again, our 3rd through 5th graders are the students who take this test. So here at Stokes, we don't put a lot of emphasis on test preparation. Before PARCC, we definitely give students the opportunity to practice a few times on the PARCC test questions, but we find that you know, we really value instructional time, and we don't want to dedicate more time than is necessary to test prep. But on the other hand, right, it's really important for students to be comfortable and familiar with the kinds of questions that PARCC is asking in order for them to be able to do well on this test. So my suggestion is that you and your children throughout the school year before May, like no big rush, do it a couple questions at a time, take some practice tests together. And as you're doing your practice tests with your child, instead of giving them answers to the questions, because that's not going to help them answer the kinds of questions that will be specifically on their test in the spring, encourage your child to persevere through challenging questions and really encourage them when they make attempts at difficult questions. Additionally, it's really helpful for us to ask questions about the strategies that they're using when they're answering their questions. So rather than saying, no, this is how you do it, be like, oh, what strategy are you using to solve that? Could you think of another way to do it? And so these are the kinds of questions and encouragement that will help them persevere when they're faced with these questions, these challenging PARCC questions in the spring, because you won't be next to them to support them, right? And so we need to make sure that they're able to kind of have metacognition and be able to do those things themselves. Additionally, it's great for families to help by asking their children to solve real-world math problems together and ask them to explain their thinking. I put a link down there to an organization called Bedtime Math. And it has some really fun, interesting real world problems that they give you one new problem every day. And there's different levels of questions related to those problems in those real world problems every day. And they're fun and super kid friendly. And so they have like a little kid version and a big kid version of the math kind of question. And doing one of those every day together and asking them, really importantly, to explain their thinking and the way that they solve their problem will really help them build those articulation skills for those math problems like the one we saw together today. As they're reading books, ask them to cite evidence when you ask them comprehension questions. So if you say, oh, what book are you reading? And they give you a little description of what they're reading. And you ask them to tell you about a character, for instance, ask them to cite evidence of why they're answering those questions the way they are. A really helpful question that we use a lot here at Stokes is, what makes you say that? So if they're like, oh, the main character in my book is really, bold and brave. Well, what makes you say that? And then they have to think about what they read in their stories to make that conclusion. And that helps them really think about citing evidence. As they get closer to PARCC, make sure that you encourage them to try their best, but don't overemphasize the importance of the test to them, because we find that if students feel that it's the end all be all of their academic career, that it causes a lot of test anxiety, which doesn't help anybody do better. So whenever I talk to my own child who's a 5th grader this year about PARCC, I say, make sure that you're trying your best, but that's really what I care about, right? That you try your best and you work hard on it. The other piece of this that I think is important for students to understand, and we of course go through this with them before PARCC, but it's helpful if families also understand this. Classroom routines are very different during PARCC testing. We get monitored for test security by the state government. And so it has to be like 100% silent in the classroom. Teachers aren't allowed to help them at all, even with the PARCC tools on the computer, things like that. And so it's important for families to understand that and communicate that to their children. It's not that their teachers don't want to help them or don't want to be nice to them. It's not that our teachers are really strict. It's that the state has really specific regulations around test security for this exam. Additionally, online tools to support learning at home and practice for math and reading are going to be shared with families as soon as possible. And that would be IXL practice for East End and Dreambox and Amplify Reading for Brookland. And I will stop here and take any questions that you might have. I'm going to stop my share.
Miss Erica has a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. So there are a couple of things. My daughter came home with her test results yesterday. I've already sent an email to Mr. Bobby, but it was, I just want to share with you as the person who really takes these tests seriously and understands how it may make children feel to not understand how to interpret the scores or know how to interpret the scores and then feel some sort of anxiety about taking tests going forward. So my daughter came home, Mom, look at this. Tell me how I did. She said, it looks like I didn't do good. Like, what is this? And so I explained to her that I don't measure what she's capable of based on these test scores, right? But I still think it would have been better to put it in an envelope and or send it electronically because and actually this will tie into my question to you. So we've seen this. I've come to this discussion more than once, maybe 4 years ago, even 3 years ago, and when my child wasn't taking PARCC yet. And the white students were doing significantly better than Black students and Hispanic students again. At this point, I would like to know if you or the school or larger community around test taking has considered the fact that there has to be some inherent bias to this test, and even white supremacy is a part of what's happening here because the white kids aren't smarter than the Black kids. So what's happening here and why are we even doing this? Because at the end of the day, I know my child is capable of doing, I know what she's capable of, and this test is not even reflecting that. So I don't know what the hell is happening with the test, to be honest with you, because both of her parents are college educated. and a director level at their position, and she reads every day. She's doing everything she's supposed to do. So I don't know what's going on with the test, but I don't even consider it a reflection anymore of what's happening. And to see the white kids doing this much better than the Black kids is telling me that this is legit. This is not even legitimate from my point of view. And I'd like to know if you've analyzed that, and then I guess what is even the point of having these sorts of discussions without making that point. So that's it for me, and I'm gonna go off now.
Miss Erica, thank you for your feedback. I really appreciate it. I think you're absolutely 100% right. I think it's been shown through studies that standardized testing does have inherent bias. The reason we have to do it right is because that we are required by the state to do it. And families do feel like it's important for us to share this data with transparency. But Stokes School takes a very strong stance that this is one small piece of information about your children, and a very small section of what we understand about their learning. And so thank you for bringing that up. I think it's really important to mention the fact that these tests do have inherent bias. It's something that we at Stokes as a leadership definitely believe.
We have some more questions in the chat.
Yep.
The first one is if Stokes were to look back at historical efforts made to close the gap with racial disparities in the data, does the data support the efforts made are working progressively to close the gap or improve the data?
Yep. I mean, I think we can all kind of understand that the pandemic had a disproportionate impact on our typically underserved historically underserved subgroups of students. So students with less resources over the closures definitely had more impact on their learning than students who have more resources. And I'm not saying that your child, Miss Erica, is underserved at all. It's not that at all. It's just as a subgroup, that's, the impact of the pandemic had a big impact on our students with disabilities and our ELL students and other students at risk as defined by the government. And so I think that our efforts to improve the achievement gaps have been effective, and clearly there's still a lot of work to do. Is my answer.
We also have, can typing be integrated into the Stokes curriculum?
So we don't give explicit typing instruction, but we definitely give students practice with typing. And so what most of the current academic research says is that the best practice with typing is that's integrated authentically within the curriculum. So as much as we can do in the classrooms on the computers to type, while still balancing the need to be off screen sometimes, is important.
And then we have, is what Alexa says true? The majority of kids at Stokes who are tested are not meeting expectations according to the PARCC testing. If so, why is that? What happened?
Yep. So I just want to very briefly show us this one slide again, just so that we're clear. You can kind of see the percentages of students who are meeting or exceeding expectations in each of those categories at Stokes, and also in the charter sector in general. PARCC is a very challenging test. When more states were taking it in general, there was no state that had an average of greater than 50% of students achieving, meeting, or exceeding expectations on the exam. So she's right that most of the students on PARCC are not achieving a 3 or a 4 or 5, but and there's clearly a lot of work to do, but you know, we can definitely see that, particularly pre-pandemic, we are making a lot of progress with getting our numbers to a point where, you know, we could be making sure that you know, we're meeting those standards in a really high way. I see a few more.
Miss Andrea raised her hand.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having this session. I disagree with you regarding typing. I did not become a good and fast typer until I took a typing class. And that's the type of skills you gain from learning how to use a QWERTY keyboard, learning what finger your pinky types, learning what finger your index finger types, the home row, so on and so forth. So I disagree with that. It's not just something that comes from osmosis. It's a skill to be learned, just like handwriting is a skill to be learned. So from what I tell, Stokes does neither. You don't teach handwriting and you don't teach typing. So when I see my daughter try to compose something, I see a deterioration of her skills to do so because she cannot write quickly because that's not taught at Stokes, nor can she type quickly because that's not taught at Stokes. So I would say pick one and impart the skills to the students. Otherwise, the ones who are getting the apps, whose parents are teaching them, are going to be the ones that can do it and can do it with some facility and rapidity. I mean, otherwise, the skills aren't going to come. So that's just what I want to say about that. And it seems that the ability to type would be very, very crucial to doing good on some portions of the PARCC test.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Miss Andrea. We do use handwriting without tears in our lower grades as a handwriting instruction. We have an integrated formal typing instruction for many years, but I will bring that back to the instructional leadership team for consideration. It's always a balance in terms of
yeah, but you know that
time.
My daughter wasn't at Stokes in the early years, but it's not, they're not corrected on their handwriting in third or fourth grade. Sometimes I can't read what my daughter writes. So yes, they are learning to form letters. They're not learning cursive. They're not learning to write quickly. And after initially the instruction, it's not continued throughout their curriculum. So.
Yes, Jen Lewis, I agree. The current fourth graders missed half of first and all second, so they did not get a lot of that handwriting instruction, and it definitely shows. Well, I will bring back that typing suggestion to the instructional leadership team.
An earlier question was, are parents allowed to opt out of PARCC for their kids?
Right. There is no formal way for parents to opt out of a PARCC exam according to the DC government. At Stokes, we will not force a child whose parents does not want them to take PARCC to take PARCC. So if that is the thing that you'd like to not have your child do, you write us an email and we will not force your child to take PARCC. I will say, however, that Stokes is required by the government to test 95% of our students. And if we don't reach that testing threshold, there are some pretty serious consequences for us. Any other questions that I can address right now?
I don't see any more questions.
I have a survey for everybody to take.
Actually, one just popped up. Who has access to the results?
We sent them home in backpacks. What do you
Sorry.
mean other than that?
Yeah, no, this is Yodi Gaberton. Say, I was just kind of wondering, like, is it stored in a database where, let's say, a middle school, when you go to middle school or a high school or a college, could pull up kind of your name and see what your PARCC scores were? Or
Great question. So we share them. If your child goes to DCI, we share them with DCI, and any other middle schools that request a set of records, that is where we would share them.
okay.
And then if your child enrolls in another DC middle school, the database that DC has as a government your child's PARCC scores will populate in there for that middle school.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, I'm going to drop a link in the chat for a survey. Dropped it now. If you guys could fill that out, I would really appreciate your feedback and any questions.
This is Carla. I do have a comment or question. Good morning. I do have a question. Will the scores impact their access to being able to get into middle school? For example, like if their score level is 1 or 2, will that impact their being able to access DCI? Do they have to have a specific level to qualify to get into those middle schools at DCI?
Great question. Nope. DCI is a public middle school, and so they can't. Then it is. They don't have to have any certain level to get into DCI. What the PARCC scores may impact at DCI is the placement of the level of English or math classes. So some students are recommended for math or reading support classes at DCI. PARCC scores may be a piece of data that DCI uses to determine whether a child might need that. Otherwise, so some families are applying to private middle schools. If those families request that their PARCC scores be shared with those middle schools, then before admission, then those private middle schools do sometimes take them into account in terms of allowing students to get into those middle schools. Will DCI have gotten the 5th grade results before placing them in 6th grade math? This year, they definitely did not get the 5th grade results before placing them into classrooms because the PARCC scores weren't published until September. All right. Thank you for your feedback. Any other questions now?
Hi, Julia. This is Eric again. I'd just like to state one more thing. I think it would have been really helpful to, and maybe this is still possible, that that the teachers talk to the students about testing in general and how they should see themselves vis-a-vis tests like this, because it sounds like, and looked in the chat, that other parents also had a similar experience to my child. My child literally was like, wait, so I'm not smart? And I'm like, oh, no, this is, don't measure yourself, right? Like I had to have a whole conversation, right? But I think it'd be useful if the teachers also reinforce this message, or y'all could help the kids prepare for the test, because in reality, I don't think Elle was prepared for this test at all. And she doesn't take tests seriously at all. So like if they're not prepared for it, they don't have a mindset for it, and they're gonna come home with their own results, it just kind of, it feels really irresponsible. So I think it'd be really great, again, if the teachers could go back to this and say, hey guys, no, you took this home. This is what this is. This is why we don't focus on it, because we're looking at the whole child or something that makes sense. That's
Great.
all. Thank you.
Thank you for that feedback. It's a great suggestion. Anything else I can answer for you right now?
What follow-up can we expect regarding your taking to the learning team about typing / handwriting?
Okay, sure. It's a great question. Not sure how to get back to this group specifically about that, but if there are any changes to handwriting or typing instructional methodology, we will be sure to communicate that out through the newsletter. I see. You want another First Friday about how Stokes is addressing pandemic learning losses. So Senora Donado and Ms. Ben, can we make sure that we write that down on the list of suggestions, please?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Thank you guys so much for your time. I hope that you have a wonderful Friday and a wonderful long weekend.
Please remember to complete the survey. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. I will close the session. Goodbye,
Bye.
everyone. Happy weekend.
Happy weekend.